Who gon' take it there? 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 Electricity, 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 electricity. You know what's in the air. 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 It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility.
All right, so Marc Maron, for his final episode of WTF, talked to Barack Obama again. Last time he talked to Obama was when he was the president. It was a whole ordeal. Had the Secret Service come to his house and all that shit, and had a conversation with him, which went over pretty smoothly at the time. Obviously, Obama's a smooth talker. WTF was one of the most, if not the most popular podcast at the time, at least sort of in that realm. It was a very deliberate choice by Obama to talk to him on that podcast. It was an unconventional choice at the time. And, for the most part, people didn't object to it. But since then, this controversy of people talking to presidential candidates, kind of allowing them to air out their perspective and their, frankly, propaganda on their platforms. People like Theo Vaughn, Joe Rogan, talking to Donald Trump, talking to J.D. Vance, and just allowing them to uncritically spew their narrative as though that doesn't have some kind of political effect when you're blasting that out to millions of people. So Marc Maron has shared in this criticism, criticized these people for uncritically talking to these politicians. Some people in response to that, including myself, pointed out that Marc Maron also spoke pretty uncritically to the person who was the president at the time, using the exact same format that these people are using now with Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. He was kind of a pioneer in the craft of not so critically interviewing somebody in power on a podcast. And look, when it comes to the hypocrisy, I think it is hypocritical for him to have a pretty uncritical conversation, even still, with Obama, when that is the exact same thing that he's criticizing about other comedians. The thing is, he just doesn't view Obama as fundamentally corrosive and destructive of a human being and politician. And I'm inclined to agree with that, but it would have been nice to hear Obama interviewed by somebody who could point out that Obama kind of helped pave the way to where we're at now more than he safeguarded against it. And, there's some achievements that he can be given credit for, but more so what I see his legacy becoming is the things that he did that are now being tied in with what Trump is doing. So we'll get into all of that. Let me play this clip for you real quick.
You and Rogan, I guess, came up, started right around the same time, right? And it was interesting to me when, people started criticizing, I don't know, Bernie or somebody else for going on Rogan.
Right.
It's like, well, why wouldn't you? Yeah, of course, go. If you have time to go have a conversation with somebody, then that is consistent with democracy.
And, in talking about the left, that the fact that so many decided to not vote out of protest because they didn't feel that the situation in Israel, the ethnic cleansing of Gaza and whatnot, was not going to be dealt with by Kamala or however that goes. So you get this protest vote of people not willing to make a compromise for what you used to talk about as the incremental progress.
Yeah. Well, and look, that's the thing that I spend a lot of time talking to younger leaders about this.
Yeah.
And there's no simple solution to it, but I will say that part of what a liberal democracy requires is an acceptance of partial victory. If you're telling me that the Affordable Care Act is going to insure 50 million people, do I think that's better than if we were starting from scratch and I could get a single payer plan instituted and get that through Congress, and suddenly we had universal health care and we had taken the profit motive out of, do I think that would probably be a smarter way to do it? Absolutely.
Right.
But since I can't do that, I don't have the votes for that, how about this?
Yeah, we can make it better.
We can make it better. It's never been done before to completely re-engineer our energy sources in one generation.
Yeah.
And there's greed and profit motives and just getting people organized and legacy systems. It's hard, but actually we're making some progress. I said, if we're able to stop the increase at 2.5 instead of 3, there'll still be a lot of disruptions and flooding and drought and wildfires, and some bad stuff will happen. But you know what? That half a centigrade difference, that could be that could make a difference in a billion people's lives.
Right. Totally.
So I told her, I said, you tell your friends, well, that's worth working for.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that we won't have some really serious problems because of climate change.
But that's the reality.
But that's the reality. But you know what? That 0.5% difference, that could be in entire coastal villages. It could be what happens in Bangladesh, where hundreds of thousands or millions of people can eat instead of not eat.
Yeah, people like me, you throw around the words, fascism in relation to authority, just willy-nilly.
Right.
And you talk about authoritarianism as if it's something that happens everywhere else. And I think right now you have a lot of people who are still locked into this like it could never happen here. But at some point, don't we have to wake up and say, it's happening?
What I've been trying to do when I've been speaking about this publicly is just to remind folks, just as was true during the McCarthy era and has been true throughout our history, what's required in these situations is a few folks standing up and giving courage to other folks, and then more people stand up and kind of go like, yeah, no, that's not who we are. That's not our idea of America.
All right, so do I think it's the worst thing in the world that Marc Maron talked to Obama either time? No, I don't. But I do think he's falling victim a little bit to the same thing that the other podcasters who might interview J.D. Vance or Trump fall into, which, even though I think those are objectively worse people and worse politicians, the problem is that they select those type of podcasts they're going to go on based on the fact that they think you're the type of personality that's not going to have a really challenging interview with them. And that's why the podcasting format benefits them, especially as a politician who's running for office, which is another distinction between the conversation Mark's having here, at least in this iteration. But if Mark seemed like the type of guy who might throw a real haymaker of a question, not just like a personal tough question, but like a politically difficult and inconvenient question in harsh terms, this interview wouldn't have happened. Same thing with the first one. And the reason this interview happened, just like the first one, is that there's a reasonable confidence that even if Marc Maron asked some tough questions, which in this interview he really didn't, to be perfectly honest, it's at least going to be somebody who's not really challenging me. They're not trying to dig deep into questions that have negative implications for me. That's what Trump bets on when he goes on Rogan. That's what J.D. Vance bets on when he goes on Theo Vaughn. That's the calculus, that even I can defend some positions a little bit, but this isn't somebody who's going to try to drag me out. And I think it's understandable for Mark to not necessarily feel that way about Obama, but it's disappointing because I assume he would consider himself to the left of the Democrats, at least a little bit. And so if you're in that position and you can't think of a single real criticism for Obama, in power, out of power, whatever, that shows a real lack of imagination. It's not just the like right-wing critiques of Obama that can be posed to him. And he still is making this very institutionalist type of argument about how, the compromise of democracy and that sort of thing. And I think he's right. It is necessary, based on the system that we have, to understand that not everybody who has different ideas than you is like evil. And we've lost that a little bit because of the division. But I think there's underlying causes to that Obama is failing to recognize now and failed to do anything about while he was in office. And I think above all, Obama's a very smart guy. He still, is very thoughtful, although I think he's a bit of a bore, to be perfectly honest. I think the Obama theory of leadership is kind of out the window. He makes the argument for this incrementalism that he lectured us about many times while he was president and since, that it's better to make things better than to go for, like, you know, what seems to be impossible victories and stuff like that. And I mean, it's a sound logic, except for the fact that most of that incremental progress that happened during Obama's term has been completely wiped away. Almost all of it. Affordable Care Act is still there. It's actively under attack constantly. And even here, he makes this weird comment about how, do I think it would be better if there was single payer? Of course. And that's funny because not only did he never try to institute single payer healthcare, not only did he never mention single payer healthcare when he was president, not only did his predecessor, who worked underneath him, Joe Biden, run on a single payer healthcare option and then never mention it when he was in office, and not only was that person effectively installed by coalescing a more right-leaning opposition to Bernie Sanders in the 2020 election with the help of Barack Obama, but also part of being president, and this is the Bernie Sanders theory of presidency, which we have not seen in the modern era. But one of the things that you can do is organize people at scale more effectively than anyone on the planet. That's actually kind of the president's job. And so even if Obama effectively could not get some version of single-payer healthcare passed, what he could have done is mobilize people to that end, or to any end, against climate change, against actual fascism, especially as Trump came to power. Although at that point it was probably too late. The Bernie Sanders theory of presidency is not that by being Bernie Sanders and running on Medicare for all, suddenly you're just going to be able to magically make it happen. Although Obama could have done a lot with that supermajority that he rode into office on. But it's that by organizing people around an issue as president, not only do you increase exponentially the likelihood that that politically can happen, but you also will create a movement that will outlive your presidency. And I would say that Obama utterly failed to do that. And something that gets forgotten about Obama is that the grassroots infrastructure behind his campaign the first time was something that had never been seen before. They mention in this interview that he was like the first digital president, but what that means is that they created a vast digital organizing structure, something that was at the time viewed as the future. And what happened to that was it got integrated into the Democratic Party organizing infrastructure and essentially became the donation extraction and spam email production machine that keeps corporate Democrats in all of our inboxes 24/7 begging us for money. That was what became of the grassroots organizing structure that Obama built, being anti-war, anti-corporate greed, anti-climate destruction. These are the things that got him elected, that got people excited enough to vote for him. He failed to deliver in any meaningful sense on really any of those things, and then is surprised that people are cynical and have lost faith in this compromise idea of democracy. And obviously I get it. I mean, it's a sound argument, right? That we have to be able to agree and have conversations and, you know, leave both disappointed on one issue or another. That's the nature of democracy. Okay, great. But the problem is, we're not just talking about, you know, Johnny down the street who might believe some different things than me. We're talking about people so powerful that they overpowered you as president, and they effectively sabotaged Congress's ability to get anything done while you were president, and sabotage your ability to appoint a Supreme Court justice by pouring money into Congress to create the first wave of radicalization that ultimately led to Donald Trump. That was the Tea Party. So part of the Republican strategy to obstruct and sabotage, that was a wave of Republicans that was brought in because of corporate donor money, because they panicked at the idea that they might be taxed more in some way by the Obama administration, even though he didn't really have any meaningful policy to do that. And when he came into office, he also had the opportunity to go after the banks and the executives that caused the 2008 crash. It was one of the big questions when Obama came into office. So, in other words, what I'm trying to say here is that the president has the ability to shape American politics to an enormous extent. And we are seeing that now. We're being reminded, painfully reminded of that. And for a long time, Obama insisted that like we can make things a little better, we can fight for democracy, we can, have incremental improvements and ultimately still live in a stable society even if we don't get everything we quote unquote want. But now we're seeing that immediately the first person to come into office after he left is somebody who is destroying all of that. And it turns out that these people that were trying to ruin your presidency in the first place never really cared that much about democratic compromise in the first place. And not only that, this is not some massive majority of the people. This is a tiny fraction of people who is deciding for the rest of us that the planet is going to be a lot less livable a lot sooner because they'll make more money off of it. That's what we're up against. And another point that he makes here is this idea of believing in something. You got to believe something, that's your starting point. And then, you can talk about campaigns or how to organize for that. And it would be nice if Obama believed in something. Because if he did, he could have used the power of the presidency not to magically pass laws that would never be passed otherwise, but to create a movement that he could help pave the way for that could ultimately lead to some of these bold ideas actually becoming reality. That's like a leader. And this idea of I'm going to take in information from every single person and I'm going to decide what the exact middle ground compromise is. All you've done is you've made it easier for the people who want to take that little bit of compromise that you did and turn it into a full, unquestioning, repressive society that they want built in their image. You paved the way for that. You expanded ICE. You expanded the surveillance state. You could have punished the people who were responsible for the 2008 crash, and you didn't. And there is more that you could have done with the executive branch to safeguard against the abuses that we are seeing by the executive branch. Certainly Joe Biden could have done that. And, as for Marc Maron, I get it. Obama's not the most relevant figure in American politics. He probably doesn't want to burn the bridge. That's how all this shit works. That's how all of these politicians get treated with such soft gloves, is that nobody ever wants to burn the bridge. In my opinion, if you're a comedian, you're the first person who should be able to say things to a person in power that they're not expecting to hear and they don't want to hear. So I don't know. I don't think it destroys his credibility or anything. They really sidestep the issue of Gaza here. Mark brings it up and then he's the one who kind of changes the subject. Not deliberately. It's just kind of a digressive, long conversation that isn't focused on how can things be done better. It's focused on this idea of, well, here's why I had such an ineffectual presidency. And I don't know. I think that alone is enough reason to criticize him more than he did. And especially as a last episode of WTF, I don't know. It just could have been a little bit meaner. Pressure getting pressed, do you feel it now? What even happens next, I don't really know. Voice carries less, can you hear me now? Soon as I get blessed, time's running out. Pressure getting pressed. Pressure getting pressed. Feel the pressure getting pressed. Yeah. Pressure, do you feel it now? I'm just saying this.